Picture this. You just started dating someone and you go to his or her house for, let's say, Thanksgiving dinner. You end up walking through the door and his mom comes over and gives you a huge hug. You're completely caught off guard. Why? Because the family culture in that family is different from the one you're used to. Welcome to Module 2. This is video 3 on family culture. I might actually make a couple of videos on this topic because it's one of my favorites. It's quite comprehensive. So let's talk about family culture. Well, what is it? If you think about what culture is for pretty much everybody, it is simply your beliefs and behaviors that are passed down through history from generation to generation. Of course, culture can change, but it's very slow to change, and family culture is no different. Remember, again, that communication is very complex. Family culture is very complex. And there are many, many things that go into family culture, but in the next couple of videos, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. In the future videos, we're going to talk about some blockers like gender differences, conflict, poor listening, communication apprehension. All of this stuff also comes into play in your family culture. So what kinds of things can have an impact on family culture? Well, it's things like conflict handling, how you show affection, whether you are expected to conform to the rest of the way the family acts, things like humor, teasing, use of sarcasm, interrupting, and just the general flow of communication, let's say around the dinner table. You know, what's it like? Are you all talking at once or do you take turns? Is somebody yelling? Is, whatever. All kinds of things can happen. So let's talk about the first thing, which is conflict handling. I'm going to get a little bit personal on this because I have a great example of it in the difference between my husband's family and my own. I come from a family of people who are not what you would call really afraid of conflict. We don't really fight a lot. We don't yell at each other or anything like that, but we're not afraid to disagree. It's just how we were brought up. I have a brother and 2 sisters, and we're very different politically and in many other ways. So a lot of times there's, let's say, exciting dinner conversation when we're together. We pretty much stay away from political topics now, but we used to talk about them. And, I would feel completely different about something than one of my siblings did. And so we would talk about that, and then we'd be like, okay, well, what movie do we want to watch, right? It was no big deal to us. My husband told me years after we got married that he thought we all hated each other, and we don't. So it was very different in his family. In his family, and honestly, it took me years to figure this out. In his family, conflict is very uncomfortable. In fact, they avoid it at all costs. Now, they genuinely get along really, really well, so there isn't really a lot of conflict. But when it does happen, it's not very likely to be very direct. In fact, they're all quite invested in not rocking the boat. So when I came along and felt perfectly comfortable to express my views or disagree with somebody at the dinner table, it was really looked at as very rude, and it took me years to figure that out. They were really looking at me as rude. I didn't mean to be rude. I just thought it was okay for me to express my opinion. So that's just the way that happened. Another way that family culture can be different is with the way you show physical affection and even verbal affection. Like in some families, it's really common to say, I love you all the time. In my family, no. And fortunately, in my husband's family, also no. They just don't say it all the time. So imagine if you get together with somebody and you're dating, and that person expects you to say, I love you at the end of every phone conversation. You feel really weird about that. And they're going to take that as, well, she doesn't really love me. That might not be the case at all. It's just not part of your family culture to say it all the time. The same thing is true of hugging and any other kind of physical affection. I have a really good friend whose family, they hug each other all the time. Not in my family. When I see my nieces, nephews, who I only get to see once or twice a year, I don't hug them. Not if only for, if I do, it's only for a second. So It's really different in other families. Fortunately, my husband's family, also not a bunch of huggers. Thank God. All right, so the third thing we're going to talk about, this is a three, with family culture is something called conformity. It's related to the things that we were just talking about, and what it means is that in certain families, there's a little bit more pressure to conform than there is in other families. In other words, if there is a difference, you don't feel particularly like pressured to feel the way everybody else is or get on board with everybody else. That's the way it is in my family. In my husband's family, it's quite different. In fact, there was a family issue a couple of years ago where after a while, it was a very difficult issue, and after a while, the family sort of settled on a certain type of action or behavior or feeling. And I just didn't get there along with them. So I went my own way. And I thought, well, that's okay, because I have the right to feel the way I feel. But it wasn't so simple with them. I definitely have felt pressure to conform and kind of get over it or whatever and act like they do. I was outright told by a family member that I was making everybody feel uncomfortable. And I'm sure that's true. I'm just not very good at faking my emotions. So that's been a kind of a difficult situation having to do with family culture. Next time, we'll talk about humor and conversation flow.